Welcome back to the Wirex Podcast. Today we're diving into a topic that affects all of us. Who's really watching your chats? From metadata to hidden tracking, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes of mainstream messaging apps. To help us unpack this, we're joined by Kee Jefferys, co-founder of Session, a messenger built with privacy at its core. Kee will explain what metadata actually is, why it matters, and what you can do to protect your conversations. Welcome, Kee.
Nice to be here.
Great. Thanks for being here. I usually like to start off with, getting to know you a little bit more, your professional background. So, if you don't mind, just letting us know how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty young, so I haven't had too much professional experience outside of working as one of the contributors at Session. So basically, I was studying computer science at university in 2016, and I started getting interested in blockchain just casually because one of my lecturers mentioned it as an interesting kind of applied use case of cryptography. So I started delving down that hole, and I started going to meetups in Melbourne, and that was where I met the other co-founders for Session. And we had talked a bunch about, what was emerging at the time with both decentralized networks and then also the cryptocurrency side of things. And we thought that would be a really interesting way to kind of meld those ideas together to build this decentralized, incentivized network that would be able to offer, privacy and security beyond what other messengers have been able to offer before. So yeah, I've been working at Session or working as one of the contributors at Session for, I think it's coming up to 7.5 years now. So basically deferred university.
Wow.
Haven't gone back since. I think the deferment can only last for a certain period of time. So I don't think I can go back to university and pick up where I left off, unfortunately.
Well, I suppose, you're fresh off the boat, so to speak, right? With Session as well as, with fresh eyes. So, let's get down to it. Can messaging apps see who you talk to, even if they can't read what you say?
Yeah, definitely. Most of the messaging applications out there right now contain a lot of what we call metadata. So if you think about when you send a letter via the post, you can consider like the contents of the message, which are, whatever you write and you put inside of the envelope. That's protected. People can't read the contents usually if they're using end-to-end encryption. But when you post the letter via the mail, you also write the recipient's name on it, their address. You may date it, you may put the postcode on, and you may also put a return to sender address as well on the back. So that's the kind of metadata that we're talking about. In the physical real world, anyone can look at the the header of a letter and see, okay, this is where this is going. In the digital world, when we're talking about messaging applications, there is a lot of the same metadata which is attached to every single message that you send on, say, WhatsApp or Telegram. And that metadata is similar metadata. It's who is the recipient of this message, when was the message sent, if it's a group, which group is it being sent to, and the server may also have members of that group, and then also the times associated with those messages as well. And then you have other internet-based metadata like IP addresses. So combining all of this metadata together, even though you can't, in end-to-end encrypted messages, the server can't see the contents of the message, they can get a very good picture of, who you're communicating with, when you're communicating with those users, what kind of groups you interact with, what kind of channels you interact with, just from the metadata of the messages.
Wow, that's a lot, and I feel like there really is a lot that goes on behind the scenes, right? So why do apps collect details like when you're online or how often you chat, for example?
Well, I think there's kind of two reasons. The first reason is the fairly kind of benign reason, which is they need to understand where to deliver that message to. So if you didn't include information about where this message needs to go to, they wouldn't actually be able to deliver that message to the other user's phone. So the server in this case, has information about who the intended recipient is. And then they may also have information about the sender of that message to collect analytics about that user, how often they're using the service. That's kind of the more benign side of things. The more kind of not malicious, but like data collection side of things is that a lot of these companies, like WhatsApp is owned by Meta, and they want to collect as much data as possible on their users to be able to use that information to advertise to users. So if they know that two users are interacting with each other and they also have a linked Facebook profile, they can pretty easily work out, what the interests of those users might be, the topics that they may be talking about. For example, if they're both, teenagers, they might be talking about school. If they're both, 45-year-olds, maybe they're talking about going on a fishing trip or something like that. The interests are different based on who the user is. And even though they can't see the messages, they can start inferring things about the messages that they're sending. And then they can sell that data to advertisers to be able to send targeted ads to those users. So it's both, there's some metadata which is necessary to be able to deliver a message. But there's a lot more metadata which is being added to messengers in these cases, more for the purposes of being able to sell users data or get a better picture of who a user is, and then sell that to advertisers to target them.
Wow. I mean, like basic metadata, that I get, right? In terms of who you're sending the message to, but all these other details that they collect, it's just really shocking, right? And if a chat is end-to-end encrypted, does that mean no one can track you at all?
It doesn't mean that no one can track you. So, I mean, that's the concept of, that I was talking about before. Even though the contents of the messages are encrypted and the server that's, relaying that message to the recipient of the message can't read the contents, they can read the metadata of that message. And that gives a very high level ability for those servers to be able to track you as you're using the service. So you could think about certain situations where, you would send a message to one user and then you send a message to a group that also contains that user. That probably means that you're pretty good friends if you're, DMing with the user and you're also in a group with them. You can start to draw out these kind of pieces of information just based on who's talking to who, and the social kind of graph that you can create from the connections between all of those users. So you can pretty easily pinpoint a group of friends, that may be communicating with each other a lot. And then if you're able to backtrack that to information about their geolocation using their IP address, then you could say, this group of users, has this IP address. They're all talking to each other. That IP address has a geolocation that's close to a school. That probably means that they're, friends that are talking to each other at school. Or, you can really like extend this as far as you want to kind of
Wow.
draw connections between users without actually knowing the contents.
Wow. So what happens if you use a VPN? Are they still able to kind of like track you as well as, what happens when using dark mode or incognito mode, right? Does that protect you from being tracked in messaging apps as well?
Yeah, so a VPN basically it resolves one of the layers of privacy that I was talking about before, or one of the layers of exposure that I was talking about before, which is your IP address. So typically, when you're talking to, WhatsApp or Telegram, you're using your IP address, the one that's assigned to you by your internet service provider, and you're connecting directly to that service's servers, and then you're sending a message. So they know the rough geolocation, and they can also go back to that internet service provider and request data from the internet service provider as well about you as a user. Adding a VPN in the middle of that means that now your IP address that you connect to the server with is the VPN service's IP address. So they can't get that information directly, but it doesn't actually resolve any of the other metadata which is being added to messages. So on that message, you would still see the sender's ID, the sender's or the recipient's ID, potentially their phone number if you're talking about, say, Signal or WhatsApp, which attach the phone number in cases to certain messages. So you still can get a lot of metadata even if you're using a VPN.
Do you think this is also how they weed out the bots that are using apps? Maybe I don't know if I think on Telegram they do have bots to answer really basic questions and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm just wondering if that's a way to weed out the bots as well.
Well, typically what they're doing for, spam prevention in these messaging applications is they attach a phone number to your account identity. And because in most countries, it requires a bit of money to get connected to a phone number and get your receiving text messages and sending text messages. When you sign up for that service, because that phone number is connected, there's a bit of a cost to creating a new account.
Mhm.
So typically, Telegram and WhatsApp require a phone number to sign up, and one of the reasons they do that is to cut down on bots.
Right. And can someone spy on your messages if they, just know your phone number?
Yeah, so like there's different threat actors here. If we consider, a threat model where the server of WhatsApp or the server of Signal is compromised and the attacker is actually inside of the server, then if they know your phone number, they can also look up the messages that you've sent because your phone number will map to your identity in that system. And in the case of WhatsApp, for example, there's a list of all of the messages that are sent by a particular user, and all of the messages that are received by a particular user. Signal does do a bit more encryption on the metadata to be able to hide the sender's information when a message is being sent. But the recipient of a message the identity of that user has to be known, and that's then linked to a phone number in the case of Signal. So if the attacker was inside of the server, then yes, they would be able to see a bunch of metadata about that user.
Oh my goodness. And what if you delete your messages? Does that also erase the metadata the app keeps or are we all screwed?
It really depends on what the policy is of that particular application. The thing is, like in all of these cases, you need to trust that the server is actually, deleting your data. They could be storing it, forever, even though they say they aren't. But in the case of like Signal or WhatsApp, if you delete your account, usually they'll say that they delete, your metadata from their servers or your messages from their servers after a particular amount of time. So deleting messages does help in that case. But if the attacker is in the server at the time that you were sending the messages, they can just like log those, put those on their disk, and then they can recover them later. Even if they get deleted at a later point, they have a copy of it. So this is really about what would happen if you compromise the server and then there were some messages that were deleted previously. Most of the messages when we're talking about metadata, like messages like WhatsApp, I think tend to have more lax metadata retention policies where they'll retain metadata for a bit longer potentially so that they can continue to use that metadata themselves. The more private messengers typically try to delete that metadata quicker.
Right. So, and what happens to your metadata if you switch to to another messaging app, for example? Does it disappear or follow you in some way? I know all of this sounds so foundational, but I'm pretty sure our listeners would love to know.
Yeah, so typically with most of these messaging applications, they'll have some period of time where they store your messages on a server. And that basically is intended so that, if you send a message to someone and they come online at a later date, that they can still receive that message. Usually it'll expire after some period of time, though. In the case of some messages like Telegram, messages are basically stored forever. You can always historically go back unless you manually put in, disappearing messages or deleting or self-deleting messages. So when you move your accounts, that doesn't, or like if you start using a new messenger, that's not like you're requesting that server delete all of your messenger messages. they will just delete off the server after some period of time in the case of WhatsApp and Signal, I believe. But for some other messengers, they'll continue to store all of the messages and their metadata in perpetuity until you delete your account. So simply migrating doesn't necessarily delete your information.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I was going to ask you as well, what's the best way to make sure deleted messages are actually gone, right? But it just sounds so much that there's a lot that we need to consider as well, right, as users.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's like one of the key fundamental issues with most of these messengers, which are structured in a very centralized manner, where you have a group of centralized servers that are all run by that service, whether it be Meta or Facebook or Telegram. Their servers have to be fully trusted to either delete or not delete those messages. Or messages. So when you turn on the auto deleting feature, you're basically trusting that the server will delete your messages when the timer expires. But there's nothing that says that they have to do that. It's just trust based on the user and the server that they're talking to.
So what would be a good policy to have then, especially, because you were talking about, if it's a centralized platform. Yeah, so maybe if you can just shine a bit of light on that for us.
Yeah. So like my view, and this is the kind of construction of Session, is that there isn't a centralized server in Session. It's actually a collection of nodes that are run by essentially a community of node operators. And those node operators run a piece of software which enforces certain requirements around when messages are deleted. So that's the way that Session gets around it. And you don't trust a single central server. You essentially trust a network of nodes that are enforced or that have a protocol enforced mechanism for determining whether a user is running the latest version of software and whether they're actually performing the actions that need to be performed on the network. So I think the model that we should move away from is the completely centralized model where you have to trust and move to a decentralized system where your trust is in the network rather than the single central server operator.
I feel like we've come a long way, right, in terms of messaging apps. And I mean, you just kind of like got out from school not long ago, but for people like me, of just seeing the evolution of the different messaging apps, it's just astounding. What simple steps can you take to reduce tracking without quitting your favorite app?
Yeah, well, you mentioned one of those steps that you could take before, which is to use a VPN. And that doesn't solve the problem completely, but it does at least reduce those centralized servers from being able to see your IP address. Another thing which a lot of users do when they're using centralized messengers which require a phone number is that they use a burner phone number. So phone numbers are really insidious in that we use them for verification of a bunch of different services usually, and we'll tie ourselves to a single phone number for a long period of time. So we may use that to, sign up for a business, for 10 different accounts. It may also be publicly posted against our business name, for example, or if a hacker, hacks into one of those services that you've signed up for, then that phone number may be leaked, and then linked to your identity on that service. And users or hackers can kind of use that data to look at other services and say, okay, I see that phone number. I probably know who that user is. So a lot of what people are doing with some of these messengers is that they'll have a new phone number that they sign up for. They'll use that to receive the verification text message, and then they'll sign up to that service, and then they won't use that phone number for any other registrations. And that's one other way that you can kind of keep yourself more private and secure while continuing to use one of those messengers.
Right. And just before we wrap up, Key, is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe something that we didn't cover earlier?
No, I think we covered it quite a bit here regarding metadata and encryption. I just say that Session is aiming to solve most of these problems and kind of does that in a few ways. So first, it doesn't require a phone number to sign up. which means you don't have that issue that I was talking about before, where your phone number gets leaked, and then that can be used to work out what your identity is in the network. Second, it uses onion routing natively, which is kind of a more advanced version of a VPN with additional hops added in, which also hides your IP address. And then the third thing, which I touched on a little bit before as well, is that it's a decentralized network. So it doesn't use a single central server. You're not trusting a single central server to store all of your messages. So yeah, we've kind of seen these problems, and obviously a lot of people are still using centralized messaging applications, and that's fine. A lot of people like to message their parents or something, and they'll only use WhatsApp. We understand that reality, but if you're looking for something that's a bit more private and secure, I think Session's a good option to be able to resolve some of these issues without having to go, buy a new phone number or use a VPN.
Yeah, I feel like privacy is so important, right? And also trust. And funny enough, like before this interview today, a friend of mine actually suggested for me to download a Session.
Nice,
So I just
nice.
wanted to share that. And yeah, that's it for today's episode. A huge thank you to you, Kee, for joining us and for breaking down such a complex topic in such a clear way. I mean, I'm just thinking in horror now. I'm mortified. Like, oh no, how many how many apps and stuff do I have to pull back from?
Well, yeah, don't get too overwhelmed. I think a lot of people, when they start stepping into the privacy space, they want to completely remove every piece of software from their device, which might be tracking them. And then they find that their life gets a lot harder to live without those pieces of software. So I'd say like one step at a time. Look at the alternatives, try them out. You don't have to delete your, other messaging applications until you've tested out the new application and you've gotten your friends across, and then you can actually take that step. And instead of going and trying to like de-Google your whole phone or like move to all of these messengers and decentralized services, try doing it one step at a time and see what works for you instead of doing it all at once, because that can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. And such wise words. Thank you so much, Kee. Really, thank you for today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
To everyone tuning in, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and let us know your thoughts. Stay safe online, and we'll see you in the next one.